All right, so good evening, everyone, for our third seminar of the year, high rise seminar. So far, we've done water rescue and McMansion. Those were very well attended, and we've had them posted. So if you haven't seen them and you want to, they are out there. So I'll do our regular introduction. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. All right, so you should be able to see my website now. So these are the two YouTube links for our past seminars. I will be putting the high-rise one up here in case you have to bug out early or you can't, or you didn't make it at all tonight. And this is where our links are as well for signing up. Our next one's going to be the RIT pack. So that's going to be on February 15th, or the fast pack, I guess, depending on what you call it. And we're going to get into the weeds on that one, so that's not going to be the very basic hook up disconnect type thing. We're going to get a little bit more into the weeds on that, some of the different variations out there, and specifically, maybe I shouldn't call it RIP packs. It could be overall SCBA. Connections is going to be a big one, right? So a lot of departments will say, oh, we have Scott, they have Scott, so we're all compatible. That's not the case necessarily. So depending on the NFPA generation that you're in, that could absolutely be false. So we're going to get a lot into the weeds on that. And then February 27th, we'll get into getting the promotion focused on promotional exams. So oral, written, things like that, scenario based. That's obviously not something I have much experience in. So I'll be bringing in guys that have done a lot with that. So that's going to be our next couple of our scenarios, or not scenarios, our seminars out there. So excited for that. So without further ado, we'll get going into tonight. I got one advertised special guest with me and one unadvertised special guest with me. And I'm excited for tonight because we can really just shoot the shit. This is going to be a 2 hour or so kind of seminar that could be 2 days, right? If not 2 weeks. And so I know we are not going to touch on everything. And I want you guys to realize that if there's something that you want us to touch on as we're going through, please put it in the chat window. And so I have the chat window here, and I'm not going to be doing all the talking tonight. So if you have a question, if you want clarification on something, I also asked if you had questions when you signed up. So I have those questions lined up. Please put them in the chat window to make sure that we address them. Like I said, we could spend so much time on this. Before I introduce our guests, I'm just going to say that overall tonight, the tactics that these two guys are going to talk about are sound, right? So they're going to talk about, we're going to talk about hose bundles, first due company, second due company. All of that stuff is going to be sound. What's not going to be sound, and what you guys have to determine for yourselves, is when to implement these tactics. And so, for an example, I'm looking at somebody front and center here that I know is in a volunteer department and in a career department, and their career department runs 6 or 8 guys per shift, right? So when we say things like the first due OV is going to do this, the first due roofman's going to do this, the engine's going to do this, the truck's going to do this, he's got to pick one, maybe 2 of those things to do. And so please, tonight, kind of take everything, not with a grain of salt in terms of is it needing to be done, but in terms of when to do it. And so that's always my thing. I've been on both sides of this, and volunteer and career. So just realize that there's always going to be the manpower issue that's going to come into play. So without further ado, Tony, I see you're unmuted, so introduce yourself real quick. And we'll obviously delve into some stuff later, but introduce yourself to get going.
Tony Zaccaro. I'm just currently the captain of 16 truck in the FDNY. I sit on the NFPA 14 committee. I sit in a few other committees in New York City that we do some problem solving for water supply and some high rise. Myself and Danny sit on a mega high rise. Again, that might be a New York City term, a New York City problem, but it's applicable to a building, whether it's 20 stories or 800 feet, 1,000 feet. But again, just like most of you, 25 years in the FDNY, and since I was a teenager, I was in the volunteer service, one upstate New York and then one down in Long Island. Currently do not volunteer.
Very good. Thank you. And Chief, our surprise guest for the evening kind of just came about, shooting the shit in the firehouse. And I said, hey, if you're around tonight, log in. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is definitely, that things Tony and I talked about. But Chief, what are, just tell us a little bit about yourself as well. You got to unmute yourself. Well, you got to unmute yourself. There you go.
Up, guys? My name is Bobby User. I'm assigned to the 8th Battalion in Midtown Manhattan on 51st Street.
You're cutting out. Are you on your phone or
I'm on the laptop.
no?
Good?
Yeah, I got you better now.
All right. I'm assigned to Battalion 8 in Midtown Manhattan. Started my career in 16 truck, where Tony's the current captain. I'm running with both of these guys in the day-to-day operations. I started as a volunteer back in 1998. Been with the FDNY since 2006. Just wanted to jump on. Initially, I was jumping on just to get some takeaways because both these guys are very knowledgeable. And I love leaning on them for whatever they give me at work. So hopefully now, if I can give something back, I'll give something back. But they're both very knowledgeable, so I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to spend most of the time on the operational side. Certainly, I hope the chief chimes in on some things he's looking at from the command side, but we're definitely focusing on, the boots on the ground, if you will. So without further ado, Tony, lead it off. And this is such a compounded question, but what is a high rise? And so I say that because, I went to a high rise seminar a couple of years ago, and I remember someone there saying, yeah, I'm here because all we have is 1 and 2 story private dwellings, and they're putting in, a 4 and 5 story condominium. And so I'm trying to figure out what to do. And I totally get that a 4 and 5 story condominium into your 1 and 2 story is a new hazard, but that's not a high rise. So what are we talking about tonight when we say a high rise?
Yeah, I think, like you said, a high rise could be anything. Like you said, most people's, the thought process, they start thinking about,
Did we lose you? Did we lose him? We lost him. All right, he'll come back, I'm sure. It's that, you there? You gotta unmute yourself. You got you?
all right.
Sorry.
Yep.
All right,
All right,
so people think of a high rise, go.
So again, people are thinking of high rise. The reality is it's anything over 75 feet. It's not just what we typically think of, like Danny just explained for that guy, anything over 75 feet. And we have to subdivide it a little bit further into, is it going to be residential? Is it going to be a commercial? Or is it going to be an office building? Again, people that are on here, we have all different kinds of people, different departments. That high rise, again, the true definition, anything over 75 feet.
So
Okay.
75 feet is a high rise. I'm gonna say the one other thing that I kind of break it up into, and this may apply to some and may not apply to others, is almost like the newer high rises and the older high rises. And that's going to come into play when we talk a lot tonight about fire pumps, alarm systems, almost for us like project buildings versus non-project buildings, but there are obviously, and I know that many towns throughout Connecticut, New Jersey, New York have those as well, kind of like the older types of high rise that are over 75 feet, but really have nothing to them other than, the brick and standpipes. And then the newer high rises that obviously have a much more robust building systems to them. Would you kind of say that you kind of divide those as well?
Yeah, totally agree. And something, new for like New York City, again, Danny and myself, and the chief sort of reach on about a lot, like Danny said, a lot of stuff is New York City based. But one thing that we don't have in New York City that I've seen in New Jersey, Connecticut, and other areas what I've called hybrid pedestal or platform construction, where you have 2 or 3 floors of a parking garage with above it, a frame building. And, when it's all finished and done, what are you looking at? You're looking at what looks like a high rise, or what is a high rise by definition because of our access, but it's not the typical fireproof that we're talking about. Danny brought up projects. One thing we talk about in our area, and all areas in New York City at least, and all the country, I should be honest, losing that project mindset. We have a mindset of like our fireproofs are all public housing. That's what we did. That's what our bread and butter operations throughout the country were. Our fireproofs were high-rise office buildings in our bigger cities, and residential fireproofs, which were, from the 60s and 70s, and still perfect buildings compared to other buildings that we find that are falling apart in 2 or 3 years. Okay. So like, again, it goes back to knowing your buildings, understanding that term is a very broad term when you say, fireproof, high rise. Is it a fireproof, not fireproof, office building, commercial, or residential? Huge, differentiation between those different types of buildings.
Yeah, I think that and to piggyback on that, and then we'll move on. I think the first thing is, am I going to a residential or commercial? And many of these that we're finding out now are combined, where maybe parts a hotel, parts a multiple dwelling, parts even an office building, parts a hotel. So kind of having that idea of what you're going to begin with, I think is one of the first things to determine. And then comes down to, you threw in some years, and so you also brought up NFPA 14. So let's get right into it, because we know water is the most important thing at any of these, and it's probably going to be the biggest hazard at any of these as well. So what is NFPA 14? Why does 1993 always be the year that comes up when we talk about it? And if someone's has no idea what I'm talking about with those two things, what am I saying?
So, I'll check one thing.
And I have some, well, if we talk about FDCs and PRVs, PRDs, I have some pictures of those that I preset as well. But yeah, so take it away.
So we talk about, we talk about NFPA. So what's NFPA 14? NFPA 14 is anything related to standpipes. So there were all kinds of guidelines from testing to pressures to different types of ratings, every functionality part of it, from design to use to testing. Okay. Danny brings up 1993 as a sort of pivotal point. I view it as a lot of our stuff that we do our research from my groups. We use them as a sort of a model of to honor those guys. So 1993, I just got back from Philadelphia today. So I was in Philadelphia today. Every time I go there, I go to the old site where there's a monument for the One Meridian Plaza fire. Okay, so that's sort of, again, going from that, we learned a lot in the fire department. Pre-93 systems, and sometimes it's just confusing because, again, Danny, myself, and Bobby work in New York City, and we have, again, the authorities having jurisdictions. Some of the building codes it's very easy for us to not have to deal with some things that you guys have to deal with, okay, as far as pressure reducing valves and pressure restricting valves, okay? So the original pre-93 systems, because of head pressure, they didn't want to have any outlet that would have over 175 PSI. You had to use a pressure reducing valve or a pressure restricting valve or device. So what happened was you would only have 60 PSI, 65 PSI at that outlet. And what we learned at Meridian Plaza, you would be able to adjust from 65 to that 175, some type of range, if it was adjustable. But some valves are non-adjustable. Some departments don't know how to adjust them properly.
I would say most departments would not know how to adjust them properly.
Right, and I go through for myself, like
nor should they have to, frankly.
Right, they shouldn't have to, and it would be ideal to be like that. We like ourselves in New York City. That if every authority would go through and do that, in my view, again, I don't work in every city. Again, it's something for some other city to talk about and discuss, and the fire department to bring it up to those code meetings. But after 93, we went to the code now, so at least it had to have a minimum of 100. Danny, you back?
I guess it's me. All right.
Yeah, it's you. It's you.
All right. I apologize. I'm gonna make you a host just in case I get cut off again. I don't know why. So to summarize, I got pretty much everything that you said. I mean, to summarize, before 1993, the minimum pressure to a standpipe outlet was 65 psi. And so, and
Correct.
after 1993, it was 100 psi. So for those
Right.
at home, looking at what your high-rise setup is or standpipe setup is, right away, if you have 100 psi automatic nozzle on there, which pretty common in the 90s, even for standpipe setups, what's that? That's no good, right? Tony, agree?
Yep. No, no good. Sorry, I think you're
No
asking.
good. So
Yeah,
if
no
I'm
good.
only getting, so remember, we have to compensate for the hose lengths, as well as maybe 1 or 2 levels of elevation, depending where we go. So if I have 100 psi nozzle, right there and then you're out. And I know this sounds dumb to some of you, but this is something that I believe they had in Meridian Plaza, and I know that a lot of departments were running 100 psi automatic nozzles, and the thought process with that was if it doesn't get 100 psi, at least it'll put out a good stream. What we've learned, what we know, is that good streams do not put out fires. GPMs put out fires. And so I'll go to many departments, never mind standpipes that are running 100 psi automatic nozzles, and they'll put out a good stream and they're flowing 100 gallons a minute out of it. And so we'll have the argument in a little bit about even fog nozzles versus smoothbore nozzles. But if you have an automatic 100 psi nozzle on your standpipe setup, even if you're post 93, you're only required to get 100 psi at the outlet. So now add in your lengths of hose and your 100 psi at your nozzle, you're out. You're not getting your proper flow, your proper pressure that you need. So when you look at your hose attack packages, which is a big question that a lot of people brought up tonight, and we're going to get into this a little bit more. Do I need 1.75 inch? Can I do 2 inch? Do I need 2.5 inch? What can I run? What can't I run? One of the first questions to look, and I realize some places are not going to be able to take stock of every single building, but if you have 6 to 12, even a couple dozen high rises in your area, the first thing, in my opinion, to look at is, are they pre 93 or post 93? Because if they're pre 93, you're only required to get 65 psi at the outlet. If they're post 93, at least you're at 100. So Tony, I'll kind of turn it over to you and we'll expand a little bit more, because again, a lot of the questions came into play about what we're carrying. So hose bundles, we'll talk about, let's talk about size of hose first, then we'll go to nozzles, and then we'll shoot back to like the standpipe bag itself. So size of hose, New York City historically has always been 2.5. In the last few years, we've transitioned to the lead length either being 2 inch or 2.5, while the couplings are still 2.5. What's your personal take on that? Where do you go from there?
Well, my take is going back to what we talked about in the beginning, and Joey D asked the question. Yeah, the authority having jurisdiction would play into that factor as far as what your pressures. Again, going through every authority having jurisdiction per NFPA 14, meeting with your building code professionals from municipality. Like that's where you can come up with those settings. You could, again, like for us, it's at least 100. You could write anything you want. You can make it that you have to have 150 if you want it to be, but that'd be a local thing. So back to the hose, Joey. I hope that answered your question. Hose, my personal opinion, again, 2.5, 2.5 inch and an eighth smooth bore. That's my choice, right? I realize that staffing is not the same that I have. Okay, so that's you have to be a realist and realize what you're going to do, but you have to know what you're going to the battle with. Okay, I've had a bunch of friends that say, "Hey, we use two fog nozzles off a gated Y off the outlet, and hey, that's what we do." They're flowing, they're flowing 100 and 100 and change gallons per minute, and like Danny brought up before, uh, you know, that's not what's putting out the fires. It's the gallons per minute. And we could go into again a whole nother seminar on that. But knowing that every single one of these buildings, again, don't get stuck into that mindset. You may have pulled it off 100 times using 1.75 inch with a fog nozzle, and everything went perfect. When you get that new building, which has a duplex, or the floor space changed, or you're at the hospital, or you're at a new office building that they put in, water wins. I mean, that's my view on it. So 2.5, the lead length of 2.5, 2 inch, excuse me, that we have. If we went down to if we went back down to 40 at our 2.5 nozzle that we particularly use, now we're flowing 238 gallons per minute. So again, you're almost at a 30 gallon per minute difference just by 10 pounds of pressure at the nozzle. Okay, so but it's a big line to move. So if staffing is an issue, I guess you'd have to debate how you're going, what's going to work for your department, I guess is how we're gonna have to look at it. But in the end, water wins.
Yeah, I don't even have an issue with the 1.75 inch lead length that some do, and I have this debate with people because an 1.75 inch at 15/16 at 50 psi is going to give you 185 gallons a minute, and if you're running 2.5 as your first two lengths or your first 100 feet, and then 1.75 is your last length, the 15/16 still give you 185, and then to your point, you can bump that up a little bit if you need to. Bring your 60, 65 PSI at the tip instead.
All right.
Potentially get even more of the GPM. So I think that's an avenue for some departments that again are going to have the lower staffing or want more maneuverability. And the other way that I kind of figure it is if you talk about some of these, if you're back on the project apartment type thing, if you're going to these projects, they're 700 square feet, right? If that was a 1-story private dwelling, you would never stretch a 2.5. Right? It would be 1.75 inch all day, no matter how involved it was. So just because we're going up in the air, I still want the maneuverability to get in there. And some of the fires that I've seen issues with, it's been maneuverability. It hasn't been, the wind we'll get into a little bit, but the wind we've seen that, 2.5s can't combat wind. So 1 inch, 1.75 inches, it's either going to put it out or it's not. Maneuverability, to me, from what I've seen, tends to be the bigger issue than more GPM on like a 2.5 or something like that. What do you think? I mean,
Yeah, no, I think that's what I was touching on. It depends on your buildings, and when I say it depends, even for us, some of the things we'll touch on tonight, it depends on the square footage of your buildings, what you're dealing with, like, a regular project company, but, again, my old area, yeah, we used 2.5 off the standpipe, but we had low-rise projects that we used 1.75 inch off, and they were, again, it was just a less number of apartments, but they're the same square footage.
right.
No problem at all. But it's sometimes it's a manpower issue, and it's just you don't just go for the big line just because it's the big line because you're on a flash fire seminar and we said, hey, do this.
So, and that's one thing that I know we talked about before that I'm making a note we're going to touch on later. Just because you have a standpipe system doesn't mean you need to use it. If you have a fire on the 4th floor, are you better off stretching off the rig? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. One of the we have a couple code questions up here which we'll touch on a little bit. I think we hit have you seen anything? I want to touch on because this was a question what someone registered. but the 2 inch versus, have you done anything with the 2¼ inch that seems to be popular out there for standpipes, or not really yet?
I have not.
No,
Again,
really just
just to touch on one thing,
Yeah.
yeah.
Go.
No, to touch on that. So just remember too, we talk about code stuff and NFP 14. Just realize some of these depend upon your pumping capability. And again, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but depending upon your pumping capability, but the building systems, remember, the building systems they're rated to do. When I say the building system, if there's an automatic fire pump, if we weren't supplying the system, there's some problem. That outlet, that outlet and riser, we can get a 500 GPM max out of the whole thing. So if we were operating 2 lines, say, and we were flowing 290, I don't even know that two and whatever that tip size you were talking about, whatever that flow is, just realize that we can let's say, run away from water, but we're throwing so much water. If we don't have a good fire department pumping system, if we're just relying on the building system, realize that we could be overflowing what we have the capabilities to do with some sprinklers going, newer buildings, so keep those in mind.
Yeah, we're going to get into some of that stuff on the same topic of what we're talking about. And I know where you stand on this, so I'm not going to belabor it too much. But where is this? Actually, I'm sorry. That's the next question. This one, hose bundles, 350-foot sections, 275-foot sections, one 150-foot section. I mean, obviously we have the manpower, and that's one of the things,
Right.
I don't want to say issues, but one of the, you'll see people say, oh, you need 350-foot bundles, and that's the way to go. If you got 3 guys to carry it, yeah, I think 350-foot bundles is as good as you can get. But if you've identified that you need 200 feet from your outlet to your apartment, how are you getting a 4th bundle there? Are you doing another guy? Are you doing 275 foots? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think you have to plan. Like I personally, I like, we wouldn't do it, but I like the 75 footers. It's manageable. They go to a lighter weight hose. It's 75 feet. There's different ways of carrying it. I think it's, I like it. You go with, again, you have to throw a lot of manpower. Any high-rise operation is just eating up manpower. But I think planning on having that, you touched on numbers. Another silly NFPA thing, but with the outlets, just knowing that you have to do, they have to be 200 feet. If you have sprinklers, you can be 200 feet from the outlet on the fire floor, not counting the floor below. So sometimes hose, you have to plan on always getting 200 feet, at a minimum, getting 200 feet up there. Again, knowing your buildings, but the 75-foot bundles, I like them. I mean, obviously, I like our way, but our way is only because we have the manpower. I think going back to people who have switched from, say, like an iron duck bag where they had, gated Y and like 3 lengths in there and everything, the guys were carrying it. I think that worked back then. And I think some people who have transitioned to either 2-inch or 2.5-inch hose, they're trying to do that same thing using that new hose in those bundle packs to try to carry them. And it's too much. It's too, it's too much. And, you have to find a way to break it up a little bit better than trying to drag everything up there in a, prepackaged bag. It's too much.
So 2 things that I kind of glanced over, and I shouldn't. Where are we hooking up to the fire? Meaning we have a fire on the 11th floor. Where are we hooking up? Why are we hooking up on 10 and not 11? And where are we charging the line? And someone, a good friend of ours, brought it up here. Are we always charging it in the stairwell, or where are we charging the line? I think that's a really important thing to bring up as well.
Everybody is going to have their own, I don't say have their own view as far as, where we're hooking up. Well, you should always be on the floor below. Why should we be on the floor below? Things can change. Obviously, things can change drastically. And if we had I think you have it planned to talk briefly about wind-driven fires later on. We don't want to be on that fire floor, okay? We want to be at a minimum the floor below. So we're on that floor below. And why? Again, the protection for ourselves and that control man, whoever's operating. If we even have a control man, right? We may set it and boom, we're operating, so we have to help out. We don't want to leave that on the fire floor. So the next part is, which is again, situational directed, where are we charging that line? You know, where are we stretching and charging it? Well, I think that all comes down to, do we have door control of the apartment or fire, you know, that hallway? Is it part of the, you know, ideal H? Or is it not? If we have door control and everything's perfect and we didn't force the door and it's the apartment door, guess what? You know, like for us, say we'll stretch dry to that door, flake out everything, get ourselves set up, we're good to go. The next problem runs into what? If it's out into the hallway, and again, staffing plays a part of this as well. So where are we gonna flake out? My old place in the Bronx, we used to flake out on the floor below, stretch the whole line on the floor below, and you know, boom, charge it, and we would go, you know, get back to that fire floor door, and we stretched there. We had, again, we were a 5-man engine, so we were very fortunate. But you know, use elevation, stretching up the staircase to help me.
Remember, Tony, technically you were a 6-man engine. These people think
Yes, true.
5
Right.
were on it. So
Right. So like everything, you know, again, we keep on hitting on it. Everything here, even if I go to a small department in I go to a small department in Jersey, okay. You know, their staffing could change and they're operating with 6 different departments at this high-rise fire, right? I remember not that long ago there was I think Fort Lee. I'm trying to think, it was Fort Lee. You know, they had a very problematic fire and a ton of departments put together to try to you know, it's tough enough to do your own department with a policy, let alone 5 different departments that are coming in, because my staffing and my manpower is an issue. So
my kind
those
of
2 points.
my kind of rule of thumb, and for those of you that listen to the McMansion seminar, it was kind of eye-opening for me, and I kind of equate it to the two, the same thing, where, you know, they said, I'm always going inch and 3/4 for maneuverability, regardless of the size of the building, and I'm stretching dry as far as I can. And both of those things, to me, like, if you stretch dry into a private dwelling in New York City, you'd probably get lifted, right? But you've got 3, 4 guys on a line going into a 6,000 square foot house. Why are you going to stretch it wet the entire time and try to advance it? And so I guess for those that aren't doing high rises every day, I'll use the same kind of mindset that I had with that, which is, if I'm on air, I want a charged hose line. So if I open up the stairwell door and the hallway, the public hallway is banked down and I need to put my face piece on, I probably want to enter there if I'm in the engine with a charged hose line. Whereas if I open up that hallway door as light haze or something, but I can get right up to the fire apartment, then by all means, I'm stretching dry up to the fire apartment. And just make sure that you're not just stretching the nozzle, but you have that first 50, 75 feet with you to enter the fire apartment as well. Because
Danny,
yeah, go ahead.
just to touch on one thing on it. If you stretch dry, there was a training video out there somewhere where, you know, I would, even if I knew, I wouldn't say who it was, just because it's not a pick on them. But we talk about packages and bundles and everything. There's no, I'll say no excuse if you're going to stretch dry. That lead length, as soon as if we're going to the fire floor for whatever reason, like you gotta be ready to go. Something could change in a minute. Just think about that. Whatever bundles we're setting up, you know, if we're gonna go, once we go to the fire floor, if we're doing some type of stretch because we have control, we gotta make sure that that's, you know, it's unbuckled. That's like the first thing that we have to be doing. That lead length again is ready.
I remember
to go.
you sending me that saying, hey, they have this lead length on the fire floor, but it's still bundled together. So even if they wanted to charge it, they couldn't, right?
So again, it's just, you know, again, that's just a little, just something keeping your head, like whatever your attack package, how you're going to set it up, how you're going to carry it. Just make sure that, again, that lead length is ready to operate if we're on a fire floor.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, the biggest hazard that I've seen to stretching dry, and this is something that everyone needs to be mindful of, is anytime you're stretching hose dry through any doorway, that door needs to be very well chalked. I'm not even going to say chalked, very well chalked, because if that hose gets caught under that door or in a seam and that hose gets charged, you're not getting that out easily. And that will very negatively affect your operations. So if you're going to stretch on the floor below in the hallway and then come out that hallway door, make sure that that door's chalked extremely well. If you're stretching and flaking out on the fire floor, that door needs to be chalked very effectively. And that's one of the I'll call it downsides with stretching dry, is that you have a lot more hazards. You can't get a charged line stuck under a door, but you can absolutely get a dry line stuck under a door. And then when you charge it, you're pretty well fucked.
And how to, and Danny, to go on that, like, we could look at 52nd Street, but, there's a bunch of techniques guys come up with, little tips, tricks, everything. But one of the things I know I'm lazy myself. You talk about chalking, where are we doing it? Standpipe ops, because of the enclosed stairwell coming out, we're lazy. I know myself lazy. Like I walk into the front door, what do? Boom, I'm throwing the chalk up on the top. Okay. On the top of the door. We can't do that when a line's going through that in any time. Why? Because someone just taps that. What happens? That door shuts. We're done. We gotta find a way to chalk that door down at the base. And I bring up 52nd Street for us, that fire that me and Danny are familiar with, and Chief. It had an odd sill. It had a high sill, and it was very tough to chalk it down at the base. So that was a problem. We had a little issue with the line getting jammed up there because of that lip that was on the bottom of the door. Okay. So just again,
location of your chalk, and not just blindly even saying chalking the door, but location of the chalk as well. So, again, I think we could spend another 2 hours on this. I want to make sure that we keep moving. I'm just looking through. But go to the tools and appliances in the high-rise bags, and definitely emphasize, and this is something I see all the time. We have this gorgeous, not us, but departments will have this gorgeous standpipe kit. And what won't they have in there? Any inline gauge whatsoever. So talk to me about what you're carrying in your standpipe bag and the importance of the inline gauge on there.
So everybody, again, every department's gonna be different. Who's carrying what, who's not carrying what their staffing is. But to me, like to Danny's point, for us, what are we carrying? If I was a limited department with limited money, smooth bore nozzle, 2.5-inch hose, inline pressure gauge, and a pipe wrench. Everything else to me is fluff. If I had a department, again, if I wasn't me and I had another department, the next most important thing would be what? Having whatever PRV that I had to deal with, whatever those tools were. I mean, there's all kinds of commercially, it's not advertising for anybody, but I know there's a new commercially available tool that they made. It's got a bunch of different, uses for PRVs. You hear some good things about it. So just having something to address those issues, and a ton of chocks. Like we talked about chocks, I can have a ton of my helmet everywhere else, but you seem to be running at them so quick. But that inline pressure gauge.
Why a pipe wrench?
So the pipe wrench to me, right? So we got a few things that we can go through the pipe wrench. So it was new to me till I came to Manhattan. A lot of places in Midtown, they'll carry a ball peen hammer. All right. And I thought they were motorcycle gang guys, but no, the reason was because they had caps that were stuck. Okay. I could use that pipe wrench, that 18-inch pipe wrench. I could use that as a striking tool to try to loosen up that cap if there happened to be some type of quick tight or something else on there, or it was just the similar metals and I had it jammed on there, but I can use that as a striking tool. If someone happened to steal or they broke the wheel, I have that. I can be able to turn that. I can grab that down. Some places carry vice grips to go on there. If I carry one tool that does 10 different things, I'd love it. I can use the base of that 18-inch pipe wrench to do what? Stick into the outlet, spin that around. I can do two things that are very useful for me. One is if someone's got garbage in there, I know it's there. I felt it. The other thing, if I have a smooth stem inside, that smooth stem is telling me that I have some type of internal PRV or PRD. If it's ribbed, like just a regular screw, I know it's just a normal outlet. And if I had to take off that PRD that was on there, if there was one that we're very common for us, we have removable PRDs. That 18-inch pipe wrench can take that off. And personally, again, if I'm controlling, even with a wheel, instead of trying to open up that wheel to control my flow, putting that pipe wrench on there, I can control that much easier, use the mechanical advantage to my benefit. And that's what I'd like to see.
Guys, if we're losing you on PRDs, PRVs, we're going to touch on them in a second, so I don't shy away. the one thing I wanted to bring up, and this kind of goes a little bit back to what you just said, but also some other items, is the type of nozzle choice. I know we mentioned smooth bore, and regardless of the brand that you have, this is the actually we use Acron, I believe, but this is a breakaway nozzle, and one of the reasons this is what we run, and most of you guys run out there too, some sort of breakaway nozzle. But the big theory with this is the smooth bore threads onto the front here. This is an 1.5 inch or 1 3/8 waterway with an 1.5 inch thread here. And then the smooth bore nozzle goes onto the front of that. And so a couple of things there. Number one, Tony just mentioned, I kind of forgot to mention it before, but trash, right? There's always stuff in these standpipe outlets. They don't get run unless there's a fire pretty much. And so anything that gets clogged in here, and one of the reasons that even if you're not running automatic nozzles, generally we don't like fog nozzles, is because there's a smaller orifice in there in order to kind of project the water, and so that can get any trash or stuff can get stuck in there. So the breakaway nozzle does two things. It allows you to remove the tip if something's stuck in there to let it flow through. The other thing is, because I said this is an 1.5 inch thread here, one of the things we carry, again, manpower heavy, we have an extra nozzle inside of the standpipe kit. And so if we stretch short, we can now attach hose to this nozzle. We have an increaser to go from 1.5 inch to 2.5, but if you run 1 3/4 hose, then your 1 3/4 hose will adapt right to here. And then that increaser can go and add multiple lengths of hose and then another nozzle. And so that's just another option. But more importantly than the stretching short would just be the ability to clear any sort of obstacles or any sort of obstructions inside of that nozzle. And that's something, the stretching short probably has more to do on cross lays. I actually like it when I talk to departments about setting up their cross lays. I like the breakaway nozzles more for that, because they're used to their 200, 250 foot pre-connects. Now they stretch down a driveway and they come up short. They can easily, without shutting anything off at the pump panel, just add hose onto there. So I like it for that. But same thing on the standpipe realm. If you stretched your 3 lengths and then you need a 4th length, and you already charged it, you can easily take that tip off and use that as kind of your inline shutoff. So other than that, Tony, I thought you touched on that really well. Anything else on that before we move to the outlet details? Please.
The inline pressure gauges, right? So again, it's preference, whatever. We have, we particularly, we happen to have both, old analog and a digital. There's reasons, pros, cons. I'm just gonna give my personal thing. I personally don't like the digital just because it's battery. It's battery. The other problem for me is that it seems that it doesn't adjust as quick. When I say it doesn't adjust as quick, is when I'm trying to adjust pressures. There's a little bit of lag time. And we also talked about, again, I won't say name, but I don't even know what brand we use to even go there. But one thing is high flow. If I'm correct, over 250 is high flow on our inline pressure gauges, digitals.
Yeah.
We flow again. If I said if I'm throwing an 1.1 inch tip with 50 to tip, like our procedures though, we're flowing 268 gallons per minute. So what's constantly happening? I'm getting a flash, high flow, high flow, high flow.
Yeah.
So me personally, I would rather have my analog. What's the pro or the takeaway of the digital that we use? I have a nice elbow. Okay. Some departments, I know they sew an elbow on there because I think someone just put in the chat a little while ago about hose cabinets, right? So I got a hose cabinet. I'm trying to put an inline pressure gauge without an elbow. Now I'm trying to get it out of the cabinet. I'm a little bit jammed up. So that elbow is very beneficial. And there's other departments, again, we can put 1,000 things in there. All we're doing is we're talking about limited manpower. We're weighing ourselves down. We can talk about like inline gates, which are great, but we're complaining about manpower and having to carry everything, and we just keep on throwing more and more and more in there. Okay, so just have that in your head. And then Danny, I don't know if you touched on it when you talked about extensions. We keep we talk about taking those breakaway nozzles, having an adapter for that short stretch. That I have the 1.5 to 2.5.
Yeah, increaser.
The increaser.
So someone asked, I'm going to share my screen again. Someone asked, do we take different tips? And so I'll spell this out real quick. Again, New York City style doesn't mean it's right. So we have the option of using two different lead lengths, either the 2.5 hose. So all hose from the outlet is 2.5, and then the lead length can either be 2.5-inch hose with a 1/8 inch tip, or it can be, you might have seen green hose out there. It's 2-inch lead length with a 1/16, right? They did the 1 inch tip. It was between 1 and 1/16, 1-inch tip. So those are the two options that we have. On the 1 1/8 tip, it looks like this, where it's got internal threads to it. And we do have what's called an outer stream tip, which can thread into there with a 1/2 inch orifice. And I have to do the math. I don't know how much GPM that gets you. It's not much, but if you have really, you know,
About 50 guys. We were just talking about it because
50.
again, going to package about 50.
So it'll get you about 50 gallons a minute. So not putting out a ton of fire, but if you have really, really, really low pressure, or you need to do a wash down, we can put that tip into there and give a little more reach and a little more speed, I guess, velocity to the stream if you have really low pressure. However, the 1-inch tip that we have does not have those threads on the inside, so we would not be able to do that with that. I guess theoretically you could put the 1 1/8 tip on there with the 1/2 inch, but bottom line is we're keeping it simple. If we're stretching 2-inch hose, then we're using the inch tip, and if we're stretching 2.5-inch hose, then we're using the 1 inch tip. We're not getting up there and saying, hey, this is a 15/16 fire, I'll use that, or 1-inch fire, whatever. I think the biggest thing and the best way I've kind of described outlet gauges at the outlet is just, if your engine company, you're the engine chauffeur, you come in the morning and you're doing your rig checks and you're in a private dwelling area and your gauge on discharge 1 is not working, you're going to take that discharge out of service, or you're going to take the entire rig out of service, because you're not going to pump a pumper without a pressure gauge. So why would you pump a standpipe without a pressure gauge? You have no idea what you're getting, to a dangerous level, as we've talked about before. If you don't have a pressure gauge on your standpipe, you have no idea what you're putting there. You could be putting 100 gallons a minute. You could be putting 300 gallons a minute. You just have no idea. Tony, do you disagree, or?
No, 100%. Like I said, those are the two. If I had to pick 4 things, inline pressure gauge, pipe wrench, 2.5-inch hose, 1 1/8 nozzle. That's those 4 things. That pressure gauge is so key.
I thought that was great. And again, simplifying it, you don't need tons of different things. So I thought that was great. So I want to move back from there, outlets. And so I'm going to bring up, I have not a PowerPoint, but I just put some pictures up there. And we threw out PRD, PRV, probably the two most misunderstood things in standpipe or high-rise industry. So talk to us about them. This is a PRV, I believe. You see, right?
So how I go through, so how I try to describe it for me, and again, there's guys that, I won't say names. There's a guy down in Alabama very well versed in it. I'm just, there's a ton of resources out there to get more, to get more into it. But just remember, for us, like a PRD, device, a device I can remove, right? I can get rid of it. Done.
So that's something like this.
So so that middle one, right? So something that I can take out of the way, okay? And sometimes, guys may use terms interchangeably, and that's one thing. Again, I'll go and say something, someone may disagree, which is totally fine. But the way I explain it is, again, it's a device that I defeat. Like that middle one there, I can just unscrew that whole piece and it comes off, or the bottom right, I should say. They're both the same, but the bottom right, I can just take that pipe wrench, unscrew that brass valve, that brass device. I take it off, and we save enough in the basement, and you have a nice party. But it's very easy to remove. The previous picture that Danny was showing, what do we have? We have a installed piece that, if you look in that collar above that black arrow, or where the guy's pointing, there's a spring in there. That spring gets set. That spring is only going to let so much water come out of it. The other, so that's a PR. again, we talk valve, okay? There's two things. We have a pressure reducing and we have a pressure restricting, okay? So PRV, a lot of times people just go, oh, there's one, one or the other. There's two different types, okay? When I say PRV, do they do the same thing? Yes, but one is a pressure restricting and the other one is reducing. The other thing to keep in your head with these, and again, my personal experience, I don't have a lot of personal experience with them because we don't allow them in my area. What you have to pump the system. So we were doing a drill in Jersey City and a building under construction. And it was interesting because the valve that's installed needs to flow that, let's say it's set at 100 PSI for the outlet. To get that 100 PSI, that system has to be pumped to the highest pressure for the highest elevation. So if that valve wasn't, if we did some calcs and we said, oh, I'm just gonna give 100 PSI to the building, that valve, even though it's set for 100, is only gonna give me like 60 because that spring that you see in that picture isn't getting resistance against it. Okay, so it's not gonna flow what it's supposed to flow.
So essentially what you're saying is here you have a 20-story building. This valve is at the 10th floor. And so normally
we have to pump it like it's 20.
and normally we say, hey, all right, the 10th floor is we need 150 plus 5 per floor, whatever calculation, we get into that a little bit later. You say 150 plus 5 per floor. Problem is you're not even pumping this enough for this spring to come into play. And so you're not getting like, and in the end, what is all that? How do we combat all this? I don't think most departments are going to say, all right, let's try to calculate this on the fly or beforehand. How do we combat this? Guys, we have somebody at this with our pressure gauge saying, hey, I don't have enough pressure. I need you to pump more. Hey, I don't need enough pressure. I need you to pump more. This is our pump operator at that point. And so some departments, I know, in Connecticut, they'll have like 3 on a rig. And they'll have 3 on a rig, and the engine chauffeur ends up being what we would consider the control man at the standpipe. And that makes perfect sense to me, right? He can now control that control right there and be able to figure out, all right, I need this amount of pressure for this. And he's basically now the chauffeur at the standpipe valve. But if we don't have that pressure gauge there, everything Tony just talked about is completely out the window. We don't know what we're looking at. So again, and we'll get in a little bit more on this, but PRVs are really our nemesis. The PRDs we have, and the big difference is that our PRDs are only reducing flowing pressure, right? So here you see the holes there. I limit how much I can open this. So these are we can still build up the same amount of pressure in these when we have static pressure, but once we start flowing, these are going to limit our flowing pressure. With our PRVs, these are going to limit both of our static and static and flowing pressure. So a good friend of mine, Joe, I know he's done a lot with this. So Joe, I know you're on there. You had a couple, questions or comments, and you've done a lot with adjusting. So what did you want to chime in on with these?
Thanks, Dan, for getting this all together. It's a lot of information. One thing that I've learned, because we're sort of in the same boat as everybody else, is PRVs have been around for a while, and it seems new to us because the real estate is at a minimum, so we have to go vertical. The biggest thing we found is if your city doesn't know about this, nobody knows what they're actually set at. And if you don't tell the installers what to set them at, they're going to put them at the minimum settings. So the biggest thing with the PRVs is you have to know that they're in buildings in your district, and they don't have to be in a 25-story building. We found them in buildings that were only 8 stories, and it was because the way the fire pump was set up.
And they're usually located on the lower levels, correct? Because that's where your highest pressure is going to be.
Typically, yes, but they could be on every floor, but the settings will be different as they go up in the building. But the thing is if your fire marshals don't know about it, and even worse, when they don't know about it, they're not checking them. They're usually going by the installer notes.
I remember you telling me that one of your new buildings, you found that they had them all labeled, but they installed them on the wrong floors. So your ones that were set for different levels were on different floors and stuff like that, right?
They weren't on different floors, but when we talked to the fire marshal's division, and sometimes we always like to look at why didn't you know this? And it was just as new information to them as it was to us because we weren't putting in PRVs.
Mm-hmm.
But we were doing some pre-planning and we saw the tags on the PRVs and they're non-adjustables out there. The tags were showing 100 PSI and they were telling the building owners when they were building them to set them at the time at 108, which we found out was still too low for the pressures we were running because we were at the time running 1.75 inch hose, and that required us to have about 130 PSI at the outlet. So we were already behind the 8 ball. We had a few fires where we had severe kinking issues with our hose and we were scratching our heads and
Mm-hmm.
we played with hose. And some of the issues we found is those settings were too low.
Mm-hmm.
But what we also found is if the fire marshals didn't check them, we all know everybody tries to save a buck here and there. They're not going to send 2 technicians to every floor to set those at the right pressures if we're not checking them. And we found that out through other larger cities. We talked to a couple guys in Miami. They ran into an issue with low pressure. They go to find out half the buildings that were built didn't even meet the minimum standard for outlet pressures on PRVs because the fire marshals and inspectors weren't checking them during the acceptance test for their CO. So no one was adjusting them. And that's a big issue.
And as big, and some people here are not going to have the ability to follow up on that stuff, or they don't have the march, whatever. It just goes back to having and because you could make the same argument for a hydranted area, right? These hydrants don't support the water supply that we need, but it just goes back to the importance of having that gauge on the standpipe outlet. So at least during that operation, you can say urgent, urgent, you're not getting enough water, you know? So I think that that's really important, again, just to, because not everyone's going to have control of this, at least be able to say, hey, you're not getting enough water right now, or I need more water, or whatever the case may be. So I want to, one last thing on this, Tony, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves, is if I ask you, you know, tomorrow you're going to an incident, you know, you're in the engine, right? You show up and we say, hey, we have an issue with our Siamese, we can't pump it. What's your second, what are you doing right away? You're going to pump, you're going to pump the first floor outlet, but we need to address that because that's not going to work for most. So take it away.
Right. So it's a big, you know, again, you go through some of the big names or whatever, you know, whatever. There's I believe Dave McGrail, they changed in there, you know, we talked about authority having jurisdiction. So again, for us, we stretch to the first floor and supply it. Well, if I have a PRV, I can't backfill it. Okay. So I'm going to have an issue there. So what's my options? You know, again, depending upon where the floor is. Do I have another fire department connection? Right. Do I have another fire department connection somewhere else? Probably not. Is the building interconnected? Okay. Again, going back to knowing your buildings. Do I have an interconnected building and I can use the other fire department connection? Beautiful. I'm set. Okay. If my first floor outlet's out, again, getting a hold and, you know, getting involved in your fire prevention and code things. So a lot of departments now, like I said, I believe it's McGrail, they went and they put a fire hose outlet on the first floor, down low, no PRV, it's straight piped, just for that. They made it part of their fire code. Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate, if you guys have a PRV and mostly identified with it, you might see a spring, but most likely this area where my mouse is going to be threaded. If it's a PRV on the first floor, you cannot backfeed it. So pumping that with water is not going to work. Now, test headers, if guys have seen those, it's like on the outside of the building, it's like 10 different outlets. Usually it looks like those you can backfeed, correct?
Correct. But so to go into those again, you could use the, so if you see a test header, right? So again, that test header is telling you it's a pump. If they have it, again, there's different ways they can do it, but that test header, I could go and backfeed into the system, but I'm gonna have to get someone in that pump room. I'm gonna have to open up that internal valve so that now I can get water into the system because normally that valve's shut. And a lot of systems too, they take those fire hose valves off. They take them with them, so it's just a dead cap. But if you happen to see them, yeah, I could backfeed the system through there. Is like Danny said, another option.
I think
Or
the bottom line is just I don't want you guys, because I've seen this happen on Facebook all the time where someone will just backfeed the first floor and then you look at their profile and it's a New York City guy. I'm like, well, yeah, it works there because they don't have PRV. So know your area and know what will work and won't work for your area. So this is the last thing, Tony. And again, we could talk about that for
right, yeah, I know.
years. The last thing that I want you to touch on with water before we move on, not maybe the last thing, we'll touch on a couple. I've seen this set up a ton. Hey, I can get 2 lines off of the ride. I can get 2 lines off of the outlet. Here, hey, I've got my pressure gauge, so I'm good to go. I got my gated Y, I can run 2 lines. I got my pigtail of 2.5 to, even if these are 2.5. Why is this a horrible idea?
Well, why is it a horrible idea? Well, you're robbing Peter and pay, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So what's going to happen is you get that gauge. I have no idea. Again, you touched on it earlier. The only thing worse than seeing this is 2 fog nozzles on the end of them. You don't know what you're flowing. And when you shut down the one, what's going to happen to the other one? We're taking their pressure. When I open up the line back up, I'm stealing pressure. Depending upon how the system's being fed, if it's being fed by the building fire pump, gravity, or us, and then depending upon how our pump is working, the FD pump, is my pro pressure governor going to be jumping all over if I use one? It's just a horrible idea because you're robbing Peter to pay Paul with that gate.
Well, you're gonna need more pressure too because you're supplying 2 lines. Assuming these 2 lines are going to different floors, they require different pressures to begin with. 5 psi per that. Assuming one's going to a different floor, it's also gonna be a longer length, so it requires more pressure there. And your inline gauge is only on the intake, so you don't know what you're getting to each line.
Right, and that's what we said. We said the most important thing was that inline pressure gauge. That inline pressure gauge is just telling me what both lines are doing. I have no idea what each line is doing. And like you said, they're both different. When I shut one down, I'm gonna, if there was someone there trying to adjust it, they're gonna be shutting down one line, extending one. It's gonna be a disaster. Horrible.
And reality is most of these fires are 1-line fires. Get 1 line into operation as quick as possible. Don't worry about your second line. We will talk about that. Someone asked about that. We'll talk about that a little bit, but getting 1 line into operation, don't worry about running 2 different lines in my opinion.
Yep. And again, people come through and a lot of times it'll come down to, hey, I don't have the manpower. We do this. Guess what? Excuses don't put out fires. Like, sometimes, again, we're very fortunate. But you got to, again, water puts out fire, excuses don't.
So before we move on, Chief, we talked about water, so you're not getting wet at most of these, but what are some things you're queuing in on? What's going through your mind as guys say, all right, I have an issue with water, or I don't know. What are you thinking of as a chief with water? Because you're not putting your hands on the outlet or anything like that. So what's your mind going through?
The thing I think about is water. Even standing in the street initially, I'm looking at the shoulders, seeing if they got a good supply of water from the hydrant, seeing if they stretch to connect to the system, and I'm listening. It's we operate. You can be in the lobby or outside for a while before anyone shows up. Once you guys go on, it's but the inline pressure gauge, it's one of the devices that we also troubleshoot with. So, if I hear you're not getting enough pressure line, so things like the inline pressure gauge and the
Yeah, I can't hear you at all. I asked someone else, they couldn't either. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's your laptop or not. We'll get back to you. Pay your internet bill. Come on. All right, Tony. We'll try to get him in a little bit later. Let me see what we got. So let's move back from the outlet. Let's talk real quick about fire pumps. I don't want to spend too much time on that. I have a couple good questions about victims and some of like the nitty gritty stuff that I definitely want to touch on. But talk to me about fire pump. So this question, and it's a friend of mine I talked to the other day, and you touched a little bit on it, but fire pump considerations, system pressures, correlating pump pressures. What am I pumping to? And we're going to tie that into the Siameses as well. Someone asked, how do I know what Siamese to hook up to, or identifying the building connections and what to connect to? So those were some very good questions. And then after we get back to the rig, meaning we go through Siamese back out, we're going to talk about some of the nitty gritty operations. So talk to me about building systems a little bit, not for someone like you that loves them, but for someone that is going to respond to one high rise in their career.
No, just note the highlights of this. Signage is important. The guy asked about signage, like where do I hook up to, right? So we talk about signage. Are we doing a combination system? Like, is that fire department? So I'll play. You're spelling high, HIGH. Like I broke you doing that. Now it's a fire department connection. Whatever. Now, like if you look at industry terms or code terms. So we go into that. Signage is important. Is it doing the standpipe and the sprinklers? If it's doing the standpipe and the sprinklers, okay. I know pretty much.
I think I put a picture up there. You could
that one up there. Yep. Perfect. So if I, colors, New York City happens to have colors. I did a lot of work in Long Island, and the fire marshals used to laugh because they're like, you guys with your colors, because we would paint everything. But your jurisdiction could have you knowing what the system is, just so you can visually look at it. But signage and caps and just knowing your buildings is a huge benefit. So if you see a building which is doing the signage says, and it is a combination system with sprinklers and a standpipe, 99.9% of the time that building's gonna have an automatic fire pump. Okay, so there's nothing to turn on. You're probably not in most, unless you're in an old school district, you're not gonna see a manual fire pump like that we may see in our area, that you have to turn on and activate. So the pump's gonna kick on automatically as soon as one of the sprinkler heads go off, or before we're even hooked up. If we go and open up we're flushing the outlet, the fire pump's gonna kick on. And I touched on it earlier that automatic fire pump is only gonna give me, for that whole rise, or the maximum I'm gonna be able to get is 500 gallons per minute. Okay. But some of those pressure numbers that we talked about before are when it's flowing 250. So again, knowing what your attack package is, okay, and whether the building fire pump is going to be adequate. I'd love to do a study one day to see how much water, we go and hook up to systems, how much water actually from us, if any, is effective on the fire versus is it all the building system that does it, okay?
Yeah, we've talked about that a bunch.
So, just going through trying to figure out that. So pump wise, those are the two important things. Realizing that whether I have a manual pump or a manual pump, which again, you probably won't have a manual pump, but even just knowing if your building has a fire pump, okay? If it just has a standpipe, no sprinklers, it's 50-50 depending upon if it's an older building, whether or not it has a fire pump in it, an automatic fire pump in it. If you see a fire department connection that says sprinkler and standpipe, again, 99.9% of the time you have a fire pump that's supplying you your water. The next part of it, you talked about signage, knowing what I'm supplying, making sure I read everything. Does it say sprinkler? Does it say standpipe? You're hooking up to the wrong one. You're supplying the sprinkler. It's not a combination system. You're not getting any water to that outlet. It's only going to the sprinkler system. The other very common misconception is guys think that we supply the fire department connection and there's a fire pump and we're augmenting that fire pump. It's either one or the other. It's either the building fire pump or us. It's not, we're not backfilling, we're not tandem pumping into the fire pump. Okay. That is not how it works. It's one or the other. There's a check valve. If we do more pressure than the building fire pump's doing, we have control of the fire. If we're not doing enough, the building fire pump's doing it, okay? So.
Yeah, so and the way I've described that, just to kind of put it in perspective, is I've said if your SOP is all right, the first engine, and we're talking about private dwellings now, the first engine shows up, grabs the hydrant, stretches their line, all that. And now the second engine, their job is to augment, have a second water supply for the first engine. And so you grab a second hydrant, you're the second due engine, you grab a second hydrant, you stretch a line to the first engine, great, you back them up. You're not just going to automatically start blowing water into them, right? You're going to communicate with them. You're going to see, hey, is the first line doing well? Is it not doing well? Do you have enough water? Do you not? And to me, for some of these modern buildings, that's where we're kind of missing the boat potentially. If the first due engine is up there with a standpipe flowing proper water, why am I going to fuck with that? Right? Like, why do I want to now supply 400 PSI to the building system, potentially blow a pipe apart, whatever the case may be, if everything's going well? If they're saying, hey, we don't have enough water up here, well, yeah, I'm going to supply the system. Am I wrong?
No, 100%. And that's where that misconception comes in too. Because like, we have this concept that we supply, we come in, we supply the first due engine, like we're doing a relay. Well, that's not how it works in, that's not how it works in the building fire pump system. It's one or the other. And like you said, that you talked earlier, you said that control man, or the guy at the outlet, whatever we're going to name him, he's our apparatus operator now, right? He's controlling everything up there. He's, so everything's guided by him. If he's like, hey, I'm good with pressure, what do we know downstairs? I'm not suggesting that we don't hook up, but again, maybe we hook up and we give 100 PSI just to the system, so we know what we know. We have water in the system. Yeah. We're all good. Everything's perfect. If I need to boost it up, I boost it up.
But I think it goes back to communication.
Correct.
Are you guys good up there? Yeah, we're good. We're flowing. I have good pressure at the outlet. Why am I going to fuck with that?
And one other thing is we're very good at operating at a private dwelling or a tenement fire or whatever else. But one thing, we go back to what I said before about that project mindset, right? A building without a fire pump in it. So who's controlling everything? We're downstairs, we're giving our pressure up there, we're involved. When we throw a building fire pump in, now there's someone else involved, okay? And that chauffeur, chauffeur in the street, paying attention to his pressures when he's given. If he's showing a flow, what's it tell him? He's he either broke something or his water's going up to the outlet. If he's just churning his pump and he's got pressure going in but no flow, what's it telling him? That the fire pump has control of fire right now. He's not. So again, going to your point, if he's putting 200 PSI in and the rig's revving, he's got a single stage pump and it's revving and he's going through, what's he doing? All he's doing is spinning his wheels right now.
Unfortunately, I don't see flow meters out there as much as we have them, but they're definitely
okay.
Standpipe, a very good idea, and we could talk about that a little bit.
Right.
The one thing, and Joe, you're typing something to me. I'm gonna bring you on in a second to talk about that if you can. The one thing I want to point out, I put a bunch of different Siameses up here, just construction wise, whether they're two into a wall like this, up in a pipe like this, clapper valve like this, they all have some sort of, I guess, clapper or stop valve inside. So like this area is dry, it's not going to freeze. This area is dry, it's not going to freeze, so that you have to pump in here to get that stuff, to get that valve open. My point is, and again, it's not going to happen often, but when you guys go to a fire in these buildings, I know it's the last thing you're thinking about, but before you leave, I know your marshal's going to go for the fire investigation, but make sure that the system gets serviced, because if I unhook my hoses here, there's going to be water here, and no one's going to look at that for another 5 years until the hydrostatic test probably. So just make sure that the system gets serviced anytime you have a fire there. I know we put in like a referral every single time just so that it gets serviced. Just make sure that that water gets drained out back to the clapper valve so that it can't freeze in there like that. Joe, so a little bit of, you mentioned what about FDC signage for system pressures in PRV equipped buildings? So what exactly are you referring to there?
What I was saying before, and we did this on only one building in our city, and it was the first one to have a PRV in it. We actually had them put the system pressure on the FDC. Because like Tony had said before, with the PRVs, you have to pump it to what the fire pump pressure is pumping at. Because we did have discussions with some of the older guys that didn't really know anything about PRVs. And one of the arguments is, well, I pumped the building at 150 and then 5 per floor to get the right pressures. And the thing with the PRVs is that does not work that way. And Tony had mentioned that before. They're designed around the fire pump, not around the
Us.
fire apparatus.
Right.
And the thing is, in the heat of the moment at a fire, do we know the pressures of every building that we go to? And I've seen some cities put an ordinance in for pressures being required to put on the signage. So when you pull up to that FDC and hook up, you know it's a PRV building, and say that building has to be pumped at 280 PSI or 325 PSI. You see that on the FDC sign. So you're not there trying to guess what the actual pressure is at the time.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know the things we've done in the city is labeled the outlets with the heights so that we know, because one of the biggest things, guys, is that floors are not 10 feet, right? A lot of the legacy and some of the newer buildings, don't get me wrong, are 10 feet of floor, but that's what we were basing everything off of. And we're realizing now, like the new Chase building around the corner from us, their second floor is about 100 feet off the ground, right? It's almost 10 floors. So you need to understand that we're pumping to height, not to floor, if you will. And so on the same token of what you're talking about, Joe, just understand that we're pumping to a specific height, not to a specific floor. I want to get not off of water, but I want to get to some
Just,
of the other
okay, one
topics.
thing,
Yeah,
just
please
real
go.
quick.
Go.
So, because we just had it happen, we just had the 66th Street fire the other day. So the other thing, guys, we talk about equipment, having a chauffeur bag, as I call it, problem-solving bag. So if you were going to hook up to the first floor, like again, most places cannot hook up to the first floor unless they had that special outlet, like I spoke about, that some municipalities will have them install. But even just going to that fire department connection, having it seized. And you don't have another option. So if you had that option with a double female and a double male, and I can just screw that in, and now I made my own fire department connection, or I had a cap, right? You showed a few different types, right? Each outlet has its own gate, some don't. So it's a swing. So if that thing seizes, I hook up to the one side, it's going to be blowing out the other side. I can put a gate on that.
Yeah,
so that
that's
chauffeur
great.
bag, or as I call it, problem-solving bag. And also like for some departments that go in, I know we dealt in North Bronx. We dealt with, going to Westchester. We carried, out of town and an out of town bag with different fittings for those departments. So we're combining a lot of departments going together. Depends on where you're at, having those fittings. Like I said, I was just in Philly today, and they have a lot of Storts, intakes or whatever. Which again, you come from a neighboring department, you come in like, yo, I don't have this. How am I going to hook up? So knowing what's out there and what your option is going to be. And communicating between departments that run in with each other, I should say.
We're gonna end up spending forever on this. I have two more
Yeah.
things. And these are questions, so I'm gonna just make them up.
Mhm.
One person asked, am I putting a gate on my standpipe outlet? And this is something that we never do in the city. I see it a lot outside of the city. The theory on that is that the PRVs, the springs get fucked up, right? We all know we replace the shocks on our cars every once in a while. We know springs do not last forever. And so the theory with putting essentially a hydrant gate on a standpipe outlet is that you take that outlet, you open it up all the way so that you're not fucking with the spring, open it up all the way, and then thread. All right. Yes. Correct, Chris. I do not replace anything on my car, but if I had a car I cared about, I would replace the springs on that. You open up the outlet all the way, and then you can gate your pressures up or down with call it the hydrant gate. It's basically a 2.5-inch gate, and you can thread that up or down as needed. That seems to be fairly common practice outside of the city. Is that something you endorse, Tony?
Yeah, if you could, like I said, I touched on it before when I was saying about the two different gauges, with the elbows and the gate. Um, I think it's great, especially with a PR, if you have a PRV system. Because again, usually I think most of the places I saw, they're using a quarter turn ball valve, not a wheel. So what happens is you have that old crusty thing into the wall. I can open it up once, it's out of the way, and now I can control that quarter turn gate valve, and I have control of it. And then listening to someone else talk about it, their thing was if that whole system would not shut down, now at least I can just shut that gate off and take my hose off, and we have control of it.
Yeah, when we're talking about standpipe outlets, we're talking about the oldest of old and the abused of the abused. So
Yep.
and
But
that's
you're
where the
at
pipe wrench comes from, is to be able to
Right.
open up these valves that don't really work anymore. So
Yep. I think that's the problem, though. You just have to go through like, your risk versus reward. How many times does it go through? How much weight am I putting in? How much stuff can I put into my bag?
yeah. And then you show up, you have two Siameses. You've got a sprinkler Siamese and a standpipe Siamese. Which are you supplying first?
Well, again, this is me. I would go with the standpipe because I want my standpipe. Most times we talk about signage. If they're separate from each other, I'm gonna go with it's probably not, the sprinklers are in either a lower portion of the building, which I don't know if it's involved with, or it's in the cellar. You're usually not gonna run into, again, I say usually, a system's not gonna be designed that I'm gonna have a standpipe and a sprinkler, and they both do the whole building all together. Usually it's a partially supplied system, covered system, I should say, excuse me. And you touched on that too. Again, some of the bigger cities are starting to see it. You see multi-zone systems. So for me and Danny, it's very common for us, our buildings and what we do in our side groups. But supplying the right floor. You might have a building that it's floor 1 to 25 and 26 to 50 is the other zone. So making sure you're supplying the right fire department connection. So you're supplying the part that you're supposed to be doing.
All right, sounds good. We
All right.
spent a lot of time on water. Let's move on.
Yep.
So there's a lot of things. Chief, let's see. Do we hear you now? Let's see. Because I do want to involve you. Gotta unmute yourself.
Is that better?
Oh, 10 times better.
All
Absolutely.
right, I just had to switch devices.
All right, excellent.
Well, quickly,
So-
you want me to go back to water? I mean, I know you want to move on, but from my
Real
standpoint.
quick, yeah, real quick.
All right.
Chief perspective, water, go.
No, real quick. When we have a high-rise job, which is our whole area pretty much, but when I'm sitting there and listening, I'm watching the engine chauffeur. I'm listening to see if they're getting enough pressure. I want to hear. We touched on earlier, but the inline pressure gauge is critical, as well as the flow meter. I want to make sure everything's going well. He's getting enough water into the building, and they're getting enough pressure up the fire floor. I pay a lot of attention to the engine chauffeurs just walking around. I said for a little while there, I'm usually by myself. Their guys are outside connected to the building. Everyone's kind of gone up, and there's that quiet time. So during that quiet time, I tend to look at how they got up there, how's the water situation in the street, and how it's sounding up on the fire floor. Coming from the inline pressure gauge and the flow meter, if there's something wrong there, that's where we start troubleshooting and figure out where the problem is and what could it be. So all that information is critical to me down at street level.
On that, you say street level, but most of the time the command post is in the lobby. And I think that's something that a lot of people aren't used to. I mean, obviously a 2-story private dwelling, you're not in the lobby. So why is it commonplace for the incident commander to be inside of the lobby versus on the sidewalk in front of the building?
For a lot of our high rises, that's where a lot of the information is. I can, have access to the elevators are right there. The fire command center is right there. I can kind of account for the elevators. I can speak, I can have someone make public announcements. I get a visual of everyone coming and going. It's really like it's the command post. I usually I don't run into the lobby. I take my time to size up the building and see what's going on outside. And then I try and, get a look at what the lobby looks like and how best to kind of just direct what's going on from there.
Plus, if you're in front of the elevators and the stairwells, everyone has to pass you, so
Exactly.
no one's sneaking in, if you will.
No, no.
So Tony, you're the first new truck officer. What is going through your mind? You have a fire on an upper floor. You get in, you get there. 9 times out of 10, even if it's a good job, you're not going to see it from the street, whether it's on the, for most of you guys, B, C, or D side, or it's just vent limited. It's not, it hasn't taken out a window yet. You see nothing, but you've got multiple calls. You know, you got something. What are some things going through your mind? What are your first actions when you enter the lobby? And we're going to stick mostly with multiple dwellings, but if you want to tailor a little
No,
bit.
that was what I was gonna say, depends, you know, again, those are the things, we'll do multiple dwellings is what I'd say. It depends on your area as well, again, we're talking about public housing, or we're talking about like a lot of new buildings, new luxury high rises in whatever cities, you know, utilize when you come into that lobby, do I have any type of an alarm system? Is it giving me any type of indication on what's going on? Is there staff there? You know, if you happen to have some type of staff that's in the lobby, you know, again, it's a luxury building, non-luxury building, depends, but those guys, you know, that's their playground, right? That's where they work. They know that place inside and out. So they might be able to tell you, hey, 5D is a duplex. 5Ds, when you come out of the A staircase, it's 2 doors down to the left. So, you know, using that building personnel, using people in the lobby, right? Even like the numerous calls, you know, you come in, someone's coming out of the elevator and, you know, you could smell something on their clothes or something, you know, picking up something from them. So what else am I looking at? I'm looking at, you know, come into that lobby, how many staircases are there? What kind of elevator, you know, how many elevators do I have? Where are they right at that point? Are we talking an upper floor, a lower floor? You know, that may change my judgment as well.
But what, I don't care what the book says, what's your
Yeah.
cutoff using stairs versus elevator?
Oh, well, so me rewriting the books made it, you know, easier.
Yeah.
But you know, I think it's a personal opinion. I think, you know, you go through like nationwide, guys dropping, walking down, you know, walking upstairs. But for me, you know, I got a fire above the above the sixth floor. I'm using the elevator. That's, you know, that's me. I just get the guys up there quicker. Again, do I have them there? What's the building? Is there a change in floor heights? You know, how many floors am I going to? So that's my view on it. If it's above 6, you know, I'll take the elevator.
Yeah, I think for me, you're sizing up the building as much as you are to your point, the building engineer, the person in charge.
Right.
You, as Chief, as Rosie said, in 2 seconds you can look at them and know if this guy's a boob or not.
Right.
You know, is
Right.
this guy going to help me, or am I just throwing him off to the side, not even dealing with him? And
Yep.
those are more for office buildings where you might have like an engineer or something like that. But
Right, but I'm just talking about even a door, you know, I say doorman, but it could just be the guy who's like just
correct.
you know, the security guard up front. He knows, oh, it's Mrs. Smith in 5D.
I
You
think
know,
I think the most important thing, and I know a lot of you guys probably don't have elevator keys, but the most important thing is to get those elevators down to the lobby and get them controlled. Because if you have, and I'm not going to call it a big building, you call it a 10-story multiple dwelling, and the fire's on the second floor, you have to get those elevators down to the lobby. Because the people on the 8th floor, if they smell any smoke, they're probably not going to call 911. They're probably not going to go down the stairs. They may not even know where their stairs are. They're going to go right for the elevator. And now that elevator has to go past the second floor, which could inherently cause its own issues. They could be stuck in there and choke to death on smoke. Get those elevators controlled regardless of the floor the fire is on, and get them down to the lobby and chalked open so they cannot go anywhere else. You do not want people in elevators above an uncontrolled fire. Disagree, Tony? Any other comments?
you could, again, you know me, I spend 2 hours on elevators,
I know, that's the problem.
but just, yeah, having control of those elevators, pulling them down, or having someone pull them down. And again, a lot of the newer buildings, again, we're for us, a lot of times when we talk, you know, the fire alarm initiating devices are going to pull those elevators down anyway. So most times you're going to come in, it's probably already down. So again, but you're paying attention to, hey, are those elevators down? If they're not, let me recall them down. Okay. So most times they're gonna come down. What else am I looking at? Staircases,
So
right?
what he's saying, guys, most of the time, correct me if I'm wrong, I know New York City, I don't know if it's outside. Most of the time, if it's a sprinkler alarm or if it's a smoke alarm in the elevator shaft or a smoke alarm in the hallway near the elevator, it'll automatically recall the elevators, what's called phase one, recall the elevators down to the lobby. And then it's up to us to key them to go to specific floors from there if we're going to use them. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. Again, depends on, again, jurisdictions are gonna, some are much tighter than others. We're changing something right now with a few different things, but technology, technology and year the elevator was built and modernized maybe, does have an impact. But again, to Danny's point, control those elevators somehow, get them downstairs because we want control, and we could have someone where some of the occupants that might be in some of the worst problems, worst positions, they may be up on those upper floors because of smoke mushrooming down, not being able to vent out, depending upon the building construction. So we want control of those elevators. So someone initially, again, it might not be me walking in the lobby for a fire on the third floor, but we have to address those elevators. Okay.
And this goes into occupants in general. And I know we have a chief that likes to get on the radio and say, tell all victims to shelter in place, and he's not wrong. So someone calls 911, and this also goes to a Facebook post I saw a couple of years ago. A fire marshal's division said, in the event of a fire in your high rise, make sure you use the stairs to get out as soon as possible. And it's like, hold on, what do we actually want people to do in a high rise fire? They're best sheltered in place 99 times out of 100, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Just close the door, open a window if you can, shelter in place. This whole evacuation thing, out. It's just going to
And
clog the stairwells.
I will-
Go.
I will throw the oddball in there, and
Of course.
brought it up in but what I brought up in the beginning, a lot of these new podium constructions that are parking garage, 3-story, 2-story parking garage on the bottom, and then a high-rise wood framed above it. Some of these things, we have to change our mentality or know our buildings.
Yeah.
Because now we have these people, we're used to this thing, oh, high-rise, shelter in place, or the people themselves, they might have lived in a public housing building and now they're in one of these buildings. Again, for us, changing that mentality of knowing our buildings and what's the sound tactic depending upon the building.
So just to give you guys a little bit, I mean, even the I forget, I apologize, I forget the name of the fire, but the one in the Bronx a couple of years ago, Tony, you probably know the name of the building or whatever. But 17 people died or something like that. I
Twin
think
Parks.
Twin
Yeah,
Parks.
Twin
Yeah,
Parks.
thank you. I think 2 people died in the original apartment, and every other person died in a hallway or a stairwell. So everyone that sheltered in place lived, and it was and I know that was an oddball building with, some very bad smoke travel, but everybody that sheltered in place lived, and it was everybody that tried to escape via stairwells or hallways that were overcome by smoke. And that just goes to, the lesson of what we're trying to do. I mean, yeah, we talk about putting the fire out, but in the end, our main goal is to save lives, and shelter in place usually is the best form of saving lives in these events. That said, you're going to get a lot of calls. If it's a legitimate fire, you're going to get a lot of calls for smoke. You're going to get a lot of calls for panic. And I do think that as much as maybe we make fun of him sometimes, telling your dispatcher to say that any calls you get, tell the people to shelter in place automatically, is probably a good idea, right?
Yeah, Chief, what?
Yeah, I guess it's more of a chief question. I mean, I know we joke, but it probably helps out, right?
No, I think it's a good start to initiate. Hey, listen, this is a good job. We're going to get a lot of calls to say, hey, listen, tell them to shelter in place, and if, the dispatcher may have to push them through. They may have, an elderly woman with difficult breathing or something up there where we got to check on. But that's our problem. That's us downstairs navigating how many people are calling, and using the resources after the fire's out to try and track down each apartment and check that box to make sure we check on the people. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to tell them to shelter in place. You gotta, the whole thing is controlling the evacuation. So if you can get ahead of it and control the evacuation, you're taking some problems off your plates that you're holding in the air trying to navigate.
And I think, yeah, and I think on that note, and I want to make sure I get to a couple things, controlling. So attack stair, evacuation stair. What are they? Why are they important? What happens in each of them? And that could be for either of you. I mean, Tony, what attack stair? What's the attack stair?
Just where my line's coming out of, right? Where I'm going to attack the fire from. So it's going to be, it's going to be my dirty stair, if you want to call it that. My line's coming out of it. Doesn't mean that's the standpipe I'm hooking up to. Again, that's a lot of times guys get confused. The A stair, say I only had an A and a B stair. I may hook up in the B stair and stretch it onto the fire floor on the A stair. My A stair is my attack. It's not where I hook up. It's where my line comes out of the clean area to the dirty area, if you want to call it.
That's important.
It's also what I'm using to vent it. I'm venting. Obviously there's gonna be smoke in that stairwell. That's gonna be one of my venting ones. And my evacuation is what I'm gonna use to get anybody who's if there was someone evacuating that I had to get them out. That's where it's my clean area, if you want to call it. I got a clean stair and a dirty stair.
Right. So if you find your fire's on 6 and your building's 12 and you find a victim on 12, you're bringing them down the evacuation stairway, correct?
Yeah, because I have a nice clean stair that should be, again, and any civilians that were leaving, we again, if we had that phone call of, 9 David, who's in a panic, guess what? You'd have to sort of make it out, which is a problem, because I know, like, even for my wife, my old building, people don't know what their staircases are, A, B, C, they don't even know what their staircases are. So, which was a problem also with Twin Parks, that people just, they were just going wherever they wanted to.
Yep. But and in Twin Parks or something like that, you may not have a PA system or an intercom to be able to communicate with everybody. So rightfully so, they may not know where to go. So that's one of the big things. I know I don't have to deal with it, but the chief, he gets in there. First thing he's asking, especially in these office buildings, is, have you made any announcements?
Yep.
What have you told people to do? So go.
Yeah. You want to look for, office buildings are a whole separate beast, but as far as like the multiple dwellings, having an attack and evacuation stair allows us to do a couple things, 2 of which are controlling the smoke as best we can to keep it to the attack stair, and try and do some stairwell door management on the fire floor and floors above. And then, at least relay to people, listen, if you're gonna be moving any victims or anyone from the floors above, we're gonna use this as the evacuation stair. So let's try and keep the attack stair for the attack and the evacuation for the evacuation. That goes back to us having to control, the flow and the cadence of the incident.
And in the end, we're trying to control the smoke as much as possible. We're trying to
I know, without, as best we can, keeping it contained to the attack stair and controlling that attack stair door is a lot of stairway management, and that's what we try and operate. It's a little easier and not easier, but with high-rise office buildings and the intercom systems, I can have the FSD or someone make an announcement, tell everyone to stay on the floor. And then, if we have to evacuate 2 floors, we'll work on getting those floors evacuated, and everyone else can kind of stay put. Some multiple dwellings are now, bringing intercom systems, but they're the newer ones. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd say almost some of our new multiple dwellings are basically office buildings, if you will.
Absolutely.
So I want to touch on, I kind of have 2 big things that I want to touch on, and then we're probably going to end up at about 2 hours. But so I want to talk about some of the oddities, floor marketing systems, or floor systems in general, duplex apartments that was thrown out there before. And duplexes to most people are, an apartment or an apartment on one side, apartment on the other side. But some of the things to look out for when you're talking about high-rise buildings, and certainly scissor stairs and labeling, things like that. So we'll start when I say marketing floors versus construction floors and skipping floors, that's a real thing, right, Tony?
Yeah, it's sort of an issue. So going through it, we're used to, most of us, we'll go back 15 years ago. What did we do? We saw a building. It didn't have a 13th floor. That was like the oddity, right? We have a few mezzanines we go through. Now what they've gone to of these buildings, everybody wants to have a cool sounding floor. Hey, my apartment's on the 100th floor. It sounds much better than saying you're on the 51st floor, right? So what they're allowed to do is the marketing term, and again, depending upon the law and where you're at, for every 10 foot of height from the ground, from street level, they can change that floor. So again, if I was at 1,000 feet, I could call myself the 100th floor, even though there's only 50 stories in the building. Okay, so what's that do for us? Well, it has a huge impact because we're here in the 100th floor. So where am I going to hook up? On the chief on the outside, we have a building. If anybody's familiar with Corey Lytle, the pitcher who crashed into a building on 72nd Street. So that particular building, excuse me, has a residential above a hospital. So you go from the 13th floor. I could be off here, but the 13th floor is the floor of the hospital, and the next floor is 22. So just think you're in the street. You got a fire on the 22nd floor. You can't find the 21st. And now you tell the chief you're hooking up on the 13th floor. It sort of changes. You're skipping. It's haphazard how we jump around the floors. You can go from 13. There's no 20 floor. There's not a floor on the 20th from 20 to 30. And then we start 31, 32. Floor heights. Danny talked about the new JP Morgan building is going to, the first floor is like 100 feet. That first floor, you're skipping floors all over the place. So it's a tough thing for us to try to manage versus what we call I call real floor versus construction, because why it's under construction, they start from the street level 1 to whatever they may happen to have in the building, but when it changes later on, your haphazard numbering floors. Okay, so it changes everything, because even if I have a fire on the 21st floor and all of a sudden, hey, I have extension to 30. Like if he doesn't know there's a marketing floor labeling system used, he thinks he has multiple floors on fire, when in reality it's just the floor above. So it does have a huge impact. And again, knowing your buildings and paying attention. You might not know it till you get there. You can pick it up on the elevators, right?
Yeah, I don't think this is always something you're going to know ahead of time. I just think if you're the chief and someone says, hey, I'm on the floor above, I'm on 14 and I have smoke and the fire was on 12, you should start queuing in like, all right, maybe they skipped the floor, maybe they've skipped floors, and it's not uncommon. When we talk about duplex apartments, what are we talking about? And this is something that, again, I've seen very much outside of the city. It's basically just 2 floors of an apartment, a duplex, triplex, whatever. It's multiple floors of the apartment, but they have an open stairwell. And so all of the same issues that if you guys filled out a private dwellings, what's my danger in a private dwelling? It's an open, unenclosed stairway. Now you have it between the 30th and 31st floor. So same type of thing there. Access stairs would be the same thing, but for an office building. So open stairwell between 2 different ones. And I only but I want to get to scissor stairs, because that's really something that if you do a high-rise lecture and you don't touch on, you're negligent. So what are scissor stairs?
So with scissor stairs, again,
I have pictures, so
what's up?
I have the pictures, so I'll put
Okay.
it now.
So yeah, we can put it up. So so scissor stairs again, we're flip-flopping every floor again. Okay. So this comes into our marketing. It comes to a real problem with marketing, as well as places that skip 13. Because if I was in a lobby, let's just say I had a normal, say 20-story building, and I was in a lobby, I would know I flip-flop every floor, right? The interchange each, I'm in the lobby, it's A to my left, B to my right. I go to the second floor, it flip-flops, keeps on going. So I can almost judge my apartment, where it's going to be, what staircase I'm going to use. But now when I take the 13th floor out, what happens? I sort of change what's going on. I knew where, hey, to the left of the elevator should be the A stair, and now it's not. And you have It's very important to pay attention to this. While I'm, we talk about if I walk in the lobby, it's easy, I'm walking up. If I take the elevator, where am I going? 2 floors below. Should be your standard practice. Depending upon the building size, I guess you could say. But paying attention how they're labeled, because I've had several buildings that the building manager tried to do the right thing. He thought he was doing the right thing, and he just looked the A stairwells to the left of the elevator, the B stairwells to the right, and he took that all the way up. He labeled it all the way up the staircase. Okay, and he had it incorrectly done. If you looked at the picture on the right, it showed me perfectly how I just crisscross every floor. Okay, so this ties into my evacuation staircase and proper labeling. If I had everything labeled properly, and we take the elevator up to the whatever the fire's on the whatever floor we're dealing with.
Here,
But
9, 10, 11.
I come to the B stairwell because that's gonna be my evacuation staircase, and it's labeled B, and I happen to bring the civilian to the B staircase, and they have it labeled wrong. What happens? I'm in the attack staircase because they labeled it wrong. Okay, so making sure that it's labeled right is huge, whether I'm doing at that operation or if I happen to be doing building inspection or I'm in that building for an EMS run, whatever it is, make sure the staircases are labeled right.
And that's one of the other reasons I mean, I don't know, admittedly, I don't always take the elevator 2 floors below, but if you know you have scissor stairs, taking it to 2 floors below also ensures that when you enter the B stairwell, if you enter 2 floors below, you can size that up. And then when you end up on the fire floor, you know that you're in the same location as you were 2 floors below. So that's a good thing there. The other thing was standpipes. So if this building right here or this building, same thing, have only one standpipe riser, just realize that the outlet is going to alternate which floor it's on, right? So the outlet is not going to run the B stairwell, right? It's going to run vertically. So if an outlet's running vertically, to say it's this black line here, on the 9th floor, it's going to be in the B stairwell. On the 10th floor, it's going to be in the A stairwell. On the 11th floor, it's back to the B stairwell. So if it has 2 outlets, you're fine. But if it's one outlet, and that's not uncommon when you have scissor stairs, it's going to run up and alternate which stairwell. So that could play a part into what the attack stair is. Or, hey, we want to enter the B stairwell, but we have to hook up in the A stairwell. So then we have to, go out into the hallway and back around. Now, the reason why you can see over here, they use scissor stairs is it takes up less space. So if you have 100 by 100 apartment building, the scissor stairs are going to take up a lot less space to get 2 stairwells in. This is kind of what it looks like at project building. You can see that, this is the 7th floor, the A stairwell's here. And then you come up 1 level and now you're in a different area on that floor. This is not scissor stairs. This is return type stairs. The most common that you run into is again, not that these are the most common, but this would be the return stairs where you come up and each place that you enter into the public hallway is the same location. So I would say it's very important, recall the elevators and identify the types of stairs that you have. If you have return stairs, you know that every floor you get to is going to be the same location. If you have scissor stairs, every other floor is going to be the same location, or every floor is going to be a different location, depending on how you want to look at it. But that's really important to identify in the initial stages of the operation. And that, to Tony's point, is it labeled correctly or not, would be another factor of that. But I just wanted you guys to understand the difference between scissor stairs and return stairs. And a lot of buildings might have both. Like, I know a lot of the project buildings had a set of scissor stairs and then a set of return stairs. So it may not be fluid across the board as well. So just be aware of that.
100%.
Anything else on stairs or size up, that type of stuff, Tony? And then I want to move to, just so you know, I want to move to wind impacted and EFIS fires to wrap up the night. So.
No, it's just, again, identifying that you have them. And, that's a great point what you said. Just because you have one set of scissor stairs doesn't mean that you have multiple, that you have that every staircase. Like at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, we used to have the A and the B were scissor stairs, and the C or the D were 2 return stairs.
So after, smoke, and if you look at victims, if you look at firemen, victims are dying from smoke in these buildings firemen, if firemen die, they're generally, it's not a collapse and they're not running out of air. So when firemen die in these buildings, it's usually from a catastrophic fire event, and usually that's wind. So what is a wind impacted fire and how do we combat that to the best of our abilities? Yeah, I didn't tell you that.
You know me. No, you had it on your list. So I think it has a lot to do with size up, okay? Size up and plan on what you're gonna do. Paying attention, every department's different, paying attention to how that flag's blowing that day. Where my district is it sitting on, am I in the Rockaways or off the Hudson River? Am I off a lake in, somewhere else? What's the wind like outside today? What's the weather like? That's where part of my size up starts with all that. Paying attention to my weather conditions and what's going on out there. One of the best ways I can tell the impact that may be going on in the fire department is by doing what? Again, we talk about staffing and positions. We didn't really talk about, again, we could spend 5 days on this. But if I had someone in an apartment above, okay, what could I do? I could simulate what the conditions would be like in that fire department, right? So the importance of, opening a window, opening the apartment door, and maybe having the stairwell door open can tell me what? It can tell me what's going on there. It might be totally fine out, but I'm on the 30th floor and man, it's blowing like crazy in there today, okay? That I might not be able to pick up downstairs. And that's just knowing the condition. Forget about it. No windows failed yet, nothing else is going on. That's just sizing up the conditions.
So
And I would take that.
I'll just relate it to what goes on in the street is not what's going on up there. And Tony brought up the floor above. And I know not everyone's going to send someone to the floor above initially,
Right.
nor probably should you, based on staffing. Everyone's bringing a RIT team in, fast truck, whatever you want to call it. They belong on the floor below the fire. It's not a collapse scenario. They're not going to get caught in fire or collapse down there. So they belong on the floor below. So they are an excellent option to force the door to the apartment below and replicate the wind conditions down there. And they will have a very good idea of what's going on as well. So that's
100%. Yeah, no, that's 100%. And then they also, if you had to use, again, going through my stance on it, but my feeling, but if I had to use an alternate strategy, sometimes that floor below I'm gonna need to get to anyway. So we just happen to go, again, my mentality is to go above. Why? Because our staffing and policies, that's not everybody's staffing nor their policy. So yeah, going below is great. But I can tell a lot from even the outside. So even if I didn't have my staffing that, my RIT, fast, whatever we're gonna call them, they're not in yet. What could I do? If I have a guy going around the side and he's like, hey, I can see fire on the 3rd floor and it's blowing out the north side, but the east side is blowing into the window and I can see it rolling around at night. What do we have? We have a wind impacted fire. Okay. But again, we can see that from the outside. We need to go know what's going on the inside, right? If I had that wind impacted fire going on in there and I have control of the door it's not out into the hallway, is a totally different fire, right? So it's not just because it's windy out that all of a sudden, oh my God, we're gonna do all these alternative strategies. Know what's going on the inside as well. Okay.
Yeah, so a wind impacted fire doesn't just need an inlet, it needs an exhaust of some sort, right? So if we have control of that apartment door, we can have all the windows inside fail. If we have control of that apartment door, that's going to hold back that fire for a long period of time. And that's the important thing why as we go through, we, control the hallway door and then the apartment door. And some of this is unfair. I mean, we could spend 2 hours just talking about wind impacted fires. The bottom line is we want to identify them and we want to control the inlets and outlets as best as possible. For the fast truck, I'll just real quick, bring an AED. I think Tony said it at the beginning. One of his biggest concerns is a guy climbing the stairs and dropping, right? So the fast truck, have an AED, have a Stokes, have some way to get a guy that has a heart attack down to the floor. Never mind getting caught in a fire. He's not getting caught in a collapse, right? So have a way to get a guy that has a heart attack on the fire floor down to the ground floor. kind of going on a tangent, but, so you believe you have a wind impacted fire, what are some of the big things that you're gonna do, Tony?
Well, again, if our staffing or equipment, what we have, again, we're very fortunate, again, going through, but two alternative strategies are what, using, controlling our ventilation to try to control, like you said, I need 2 outlets.
So the curtain,
Right? So I can use a curtain. I can control my internal ventilation as far as what I'm opening. And we can talk about the floor below nozzle, right? If you happen to have one, or depending upon where the fire is, right? So I might be able to go from the street and go through. I've just because it's a high rise doesn't mean, where's that location at fire. If I have a wind impacted fire that's on the bay on the 5th floor, it's a lot different than one on the 40th floor, right? So I don't always have I might not have those two pieces of equipment. We said that, the curtain or the floor blow nozzle, but those are 2 tools that I could use depending upon those situations.
but even a tower ladder stretched to 100 feet is gonna be a perfectly sufficient floor below, probably up to 15 or 16 floors. Right?
Right. And knowing how, again, one of the things, just like we said, fast truck, we talk about the fast truck, right? Getting them in. Well, we're hoping that we don't need them. The same thing for bringing the curtain and the, floor below nozzle. If you have them and you have the staffing and we're not on the 40th floor and all of a sudden like, oh, you know what, we need this special call this nozzle to come. Okay.
That's
Too
late.
Yeah, it's too late. Okay. And it's not just, it's just a tie into the wind impacted alternative strategies. It's not just wind driven. It could be, we talk quarters, like quarters or different things. Like I always bring it up. I had a fire on an upper floor and we couldn't get the line through the front door. They had a freezer behind and we ended up getting the door off and, moving the freezer, getting the door off. But, a heads up, engine boss, they were party wall balconies for the apartment. They stretched another line out onto that balcony and we're ready to come in the balcony to reach the fire, but we ended up getting the door. But again, thinking about these things, you need to think about them before it happens, not when we have the incident. Like, hey, what about this? Like, no, be squared away and proactive and think about it.
So Chief, you're in the lobby, you don't see anything that's going on. What are you queuing in on that's making your heads, your hair stand up and say shit ain't going well?
It's the transmissions, it's the sound of the transmissions and the urgency of the transmissions. I know a lot of the officers in the area, and I know what sounds like a routine emergency or fire, and I know when something's sounding like it's not going like it should. Going back to what Tony said is, size up starts when you're going to work. Typically at the firehouse, I usually go outside with a cup of coffee and there's a flag flying above a office building on Park Avenue that I could see from the front door. And I usually always take a look at it to see if it's ripping that day or if it's just, flailing a little bit in the wind. So knowing, what we're dealing with that night before the tour starts is huge. Just so if it does start to go sideways, that's the first thing I start to think about is, did a window fail? Was a door open? And how are we going to start mitigating this?
Well, obviously you look at the riding list first.
That's what I mean. Knowing your areas, who you work with. Knowing, every officer has a different way of conducting themselves. And over the last 3 years, I've gotten to know, how everyone talks on the radio. And if I hear something that starts to escalate, then the back hairs in the back of my neck stand up and I said, all right, let me start figuring out how we're going to take care of this and go through my checklists. Like Tony said, have the alternate strategies, knowing that the curtain's up there, figuring out if we have door control, make sure the backup line is in position. If it's on a lower floor, I wanted to touch on this before, but if it's on a lower floor and within reach of a hand line, getting that third hand line stretched and charged in the street in case we need to open it up, have it there. Have it ready. Don't wait for it to go sideways before you stretch it. I know not everyone wants to stretch the hand line outside the building, but it could possibly save a brother's life. So we got to get it there and have it ready.
You say lower floor, but I think an inch 3/4 could probably hit the 6th or 7th floor.
Yeah, that's what I mean, you know,
So,
typically
no,
I
I
kind of,
bet, well, if
I
we're
go,
talking, yeah, we're not talking second or third here. We're talking
no,
6th,
you know,
7th
it
floor.
doesn't, we touched on it before, but it doesn't have to be the 20th or 40th floor to be wind driven.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, in Hunts Point, we had plenty of buildings that were kind of just along the water along on Edgewater that would get, it would
Yeah.
be ripping, you know, the 5th or 6th floor of a tenement, the wind, you had to be at the roof, it'd be whipping at you.
5th or 6th floor, I think the Klein fire from a couple of years
Yeah.
ago was wind impact.
Yeah.
It was in the basement. So
Absolutely.
I
You know,
mean,
wind impact, it carries over to every type of dwelling and occupancy we deal with. But having, again, going plan A, plan B, plan C, and just having that ready to go
Yeah.
when it starts to go sideways is important.
so I want to wrap up. If there's any other questions, put them in the chat window, guys. I also put a link to an eval, just if you could fill that out quick. It's like 3 questions, just so I know if we're on the right page with this stuff or not. But here's, and again, so I went to the high rise seminar and they said, where would you rather have a fire? On a 20-story building, would you rather have it on the 2nd floor or the 19th floor? Tony, what do you got?
I'd rather have the 19th floor because I don't have to deal, you know, I know what's, I know what I'm dealing with. I got the 19th and 20th floor. That's it.
Right.
That's me. So again, yeah, I don't like up, you know, there's a lot of other problems that can come in, you know, with upper floors, but as a chief aspect or like controlling it, guess what? I had 2 floors. That's it. I'm
Yep.
good.
I think that was the biggest takeaway was, and someone said that, I guess I kind of knew it in the back of my mind, but you always think, oh, I want it low. But what happens when it's on the 2nd floor? Your line is easy, but you've got 17 floors or 18 floors of people you got to worry about.
When
So
we're riding to the
go.
reported fire, I look at the SIDS and see, all right, if it's on the 20th floor and it's a 22-story building, I'm like, all right, you know, if we got a job, we're not chasing smoke for 40 floors
Right.
and checking that many apartments. You know, again, smoke control is pretty difficult, but if you
I
got
mean,
a fire on the 2nd floor,
that's what people are going to die from. It ain't going to be fire.
yeah.
So. All right, well, both the chief and Anthony, thank you for joining me this evening. Again, we could have gone for 4 more hours.
Give me 1 more minute. 1 more minute.
Whoa, what, just close it up, 1 more minute, and pitch your consulting, because
Oh, yeah, I'll do
people
that
are gonna
too.
have questions, so.
But rope.
Oh, okay,
Anybody I talk to around the country, right? You know, we talk high rise. You know, we can have 4-hour debates on, you know, what line, what nozzle, what tools we're going to carry, where guys are going to go. You got to have a rope. You got to have a rope. You got to train on it. Again, I'm particular because, you know, those are my boys. You know, all of our boys, all 3 of us. You know, you got to train on it. You got to have a rope. Things go sideways, and you got to train on it. So many departments have high rises and they don't have ropes. It's a disservice for everybody. You know, we're very lucky. Black Sunday, you know, we lose 4 guys, and it's a very sad day. And you know, we get our PSS, you know, our bailout bags, and great. That's New York, and that's New York City. But a lot of departments around the country don't have those. They can be in a really bad spot. And forget about civilians, right? You can go over through the historic things, or no one says like, hey, you know, you had the nozzle at XYZ job, like as far as the public around the country, but they know who went out on a window into that really bad spot to get some civilian or another fireman. Okay, so a rope is one of the most lacking tool at high rise buildings, in my view, that guys don't talk about or departments don't consider. So that's my thing. Rope.
Chief, anything to wrap up? I know we could go on forever.
No, we could go on for it forever. Just size up is critical. Everything, multiple dwellings, private dwellings. Just size up and get ready for the tour.
And I think a lot of your buildings, you know, they'll have multiple of the same ones, so, you know, get used to what you got, you know. Even, you know, cities like Stanford, close by, they have a lot of similar buildings, you know, so you can get a good idea from going to a couple what most of them are like. But Tony and Chief, User, thank you for joining me. Everyone, thank you for logging in. The registration for the fast pack will open up, or RIT pack, whatever, will open up on Thursday. So thank you all very much for joining. This will be on YouTube. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.